Should you feed your cat wet food or dry food or both? In this video, I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of both of them and what is the healthiest for your cat. This is a no judgment zone. I am just here to hopefully inform cat parents out there to help you give your cat the healthiest life. And I do want to put a disclaimer, I am not a cat nutritionist. I'm just a person, but I have done a lot of research into the kind of food that cats need. And I just want to give my cats the healthiest life that I can, do the best that I can. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into the video. First, let's talk about the basics of wet food. Wet food has higher moisture content. It's going to be 70 to 80% moisture, which is closer to a cat's natural prey diet. It usually has more protein and fewer carbs, which is great. It's also often more palatable, which makes it great for picky eaters. Cats get the most of their hydration from their food, at least they are supposed to, because cats aren't necessarily always wanting to drink water. Even if you do things like adding a cat water fountain, cats don't get enough water from that alone, so they do need to get most of their hydration from their food, which is why wet food is so great. So the pros of wet food is that it keeps cats hydrated. It's also important for urinary and kidney health. It's going to help with preventing the likelihood of stones or urinary blockage. It also supports healthy weight when portioned correctly. Wet food is also good for cats with dental issues or missing teeth, so it's easier for your cat to eat. The cons of wet food obviously might be that it is more expensive. However, there are plenty of affordable wet food options out there. If you need some recommendations, I have done some videos about the best high quality but also affordable wet cat food available, so definitely check out my other videos about cat food if you need some recommendations. Another con with wet food is that it does need refrigeration after opening, and it will stay fresh for 3 days in the refrigerator, so maybe that's a little bit of not as much of a convenience as dry food, but I really don't think it's that inconvenient. I think it's actually great. You can still store it for 3 days, which typically you would go through a can of wet food within that amount of time anyway. So then let's talk about the basics of dry food. Dry food is lower moisture, it is convenient to store and feed, and it is often less expensive. So those are the basics of dry food. What are the pros? So the pros are that it is easy to portion, it's easy to leave it out, you can put it in an automatic feeder, it has a longer shelf life, so it does store for a longer period of time compared to wet food, and it can be useful for maybe putting it in a puzzle feeder or for training treats. So those are just some of the pros, but then what are the cons? So the cons of dry food is that it is low moisture, which can contribute to dehydration, urinary and kidney problems. It's also higher in carbs, and it is not a replacement for dental care despite the crunch myth. Cats do not need dry food for their teeth. In fact, I actually think that dry food can make plaque and tartar build up quicker. For dental health, you do need to brush your cat's teeth. Another con is that dry food is essentially equivalent of fast food, but for cats, and it is just not as nutritious. So those are the pros and cons of both wet food and dry food. It might be pretty clear already now which is healthier, but wet food is definitely the healthier option. And again, I am not here to judge. I understand that people do the best that they can, but I'm hoping that this video is just going to help inform you as to why wet food is healthier for your cat and why it is so important. Dry food also is a main contributor to urinary issues and blockages. It can cause crystals in cats. It's even more common in male cats, but it can happen to female cats as well. And feeding dry food is just going to make that type of thing way more likely to happen. Feeding wet food is really going to be great to help prevent that from happening. Urinary blockage is actually something that a lot of cats unfortunately pass away from, because it can be something that vets cannot do a whole lot about, especially if it is caught too late. It causes a lot of pain to your cat if they get a urinary blockage, and it's just not fun. So wet food is a really good way to help to prevent that. I also like to add a bit of water to my cat's wet food so they get even more hydration. I feel like I can't stress enough the importance of hydration for cats. They really, really need to be getting hydration because they're not really drinking a whole lot of water throughout the day. Even though you might see your cat drinking water throughout the day, they're likely not drinking enough. So that is why it is so important that they're also getting hydration from their food. The clear choice is definitely wet food. Overall, wet food has more nutrients and it's just overall more nutritious for your cat. It helps you meet their nutritional needs. However, I will say that not all wet food is created equal. There are definitely some not so great wet foods for cats out there, but I personally think that even the lowest quality wet food is better than the highest quality dry food, even though really dry food in general still is not good. Even if it is higher quality, higher protein, it's still dry food, so it's still just not the best. But if you feel like you can't feed only wet food, I'm not here to shame you. I completely get that. My kitten is actually just finishing up her last bit of dry food. We've only ever bought one bag of dry food and it has lasted us a year for her. She only has a little bit of dry food once a day. However, once she finishes that up, now that she is an adult, she's a year old, I am going to be taking her completely off of dry food. And our cat Ollie, he has been off of dry food completely for a while now as well. It was something that she was on from the breeder, and it also helped, I feel like, give her some more calories because she wasn't necessarily always wanting to eat as much. Dry food tends to have more calories for the portion size, but I still am going to be taking her completely off of dry food now that she is an adult. So you could do both a mix of wet and dry food if you want, especially if you're trying to save a little bit of money. Again, there are affordable wet foods out there. Pretty soon both of my cats are not going to be eating any kibble at all, but I do understand that convenience is a huge thing for people, and that's why a lot of people do want to feed dry food to their cats. However, something really cool recently came out. Pet Libro recently launched a wet food feeder, which I have done a review on if you want to check it out, but it is an automatic feeder that automatically will feed your cat wet food, and it does 3 meals. So even if you're not home, you could schedule 3 meals in a day and feed your cat wet food. It's great, and it acts like a refrigerator. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out our review video on that. I'll link it in the description box below, or I'll put a card up here as well. If convenience is the reason that you're feeding dry food, just know that you can still have feeding wet food be convenient if you were to get an automatic wet food feeder. So that is just something that I think can be really helpful for people, because I know that, you know, the fact of going to work, if you don't work from home, that is a big reason why people do want to feed dry food, and I understand the affordability as well. But yes, you can get an automatic wet food feeder, so that is great. So there are some things that I think are good to consider, which I've already kind of talked a little bit about. Cats with UTIs, kidney disease, or diabetes will benefit from wet food, and really all cats will benefit from wet food. Wet food can also help with portion control for weight management, and regardless of if you feed wet food or dry food, brushing your cat's teeth is still essential. Some people think that dry food is good for your teeth. That is actually a myth. Dry food will not help prevent plaque and tartar to build up on your cat's teeth, and like I mentioned before, I actually think that dry food can cause plaque and tartar to build up on your cat's teeth even quicker. So maybe you're watching this video and you're thinking that you might want to fully transition your cat to eating all wet food. If that is something that you're wanting to do, you do want to make sure to slowly transition your cat to completely eating wet food. If you are not quite sure how to transition your cat to eating just wet food, I do have a video on our channel about how to transition your cat's food, so definitely check that video out if you are interested. But the main thing is that you just want to very slowly introduce only feeding wet food. You're going to slowly decrease the amount of dry food that you feed and increase the amount of wet food that you feed until you are completely feeding just wet food. This is really important to prevent your cat's stomach from getting upset, so just make sure that you switch slowly by mixing old food with new food. And a little tip for that is to be patient, because cats can sometimes kind of resist change. They might not necessarily want this. I know it can be really hard if your cat has been used to only eating dry food. they're only used to eating dry food, this is definitely going to be a little bit more of a process. You can do this even in a slower way. Normally you transition food in like a week's amount of time, but if your cat is super used to eating dry food, you can kind of make this process be a little bit longer where you transition even slower. But yeah, cats, if they're only used to eating dry food, they're gonna be like, what the heck, if you try to then just completely switch them to wet food. So just do this slowly, be patient. It will take time, and if your cat only has had dry food and not wet food, you'll want to start just by simply starting to introduce them to wet food, and you can do this by slowly adding a little bit to their dry food. And if your cat is eating both wet food and dry food, that's going to be easier to transition to just wet food. But even then, it can still take your cat some time to get used to the change. So just do it slowly, be patient. It is definitely possible, even though it might seem like your cat is just hooked on the dry food. Just be patient, because you definitely can get your cat to completely be happy with just eating wet food. And you can experiment with different textures and different protein sources to figure out what kind of wet food your cat likes the best. So in conclusion, wet food overall is going to be healthier for your cat. Wet food is better for hydration and overall health. But of course, the best choice is going to depend on your cat's needs, your budget, and your lifestyle. And again, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm just a person who tries to do the best for my cats. I've done a lot of research on the best food for cats and just done a lot to try to educate myself about cats and what they need. Of course, you can always consult your vet for food recommendations, although personally I do find that sometimes, I'm not here trying to bash vets, but I know a lot of times vets do work with certain food brands and they often will recommend dry food. And I personally just don't think that cats need dry food. So yeah, I don't think that they should be on dry food, at least not solely dry food. And I don't think that it should be the main part of their diet either. So there are things that my vet has recommended that I personally do not think is biologically appropriate for cats. I'm not here trying to say that you shouldn't listen to your vet. These are just my beliefs. Vets are still gonna have good recommendations, but that is just my experience. And just remember that there are great affordable wet food options out there. I do have some videos about the best affordable wet foods for cats. I've done a video about the best affordable wet foods for kittens, and I've done a video about the best affordable wet foods for adult cats. So definitely check those videos out if you're interested and if you're looking for some recommendations for wet foods. I'll put a link to our food review playlist in the description box below if you are interested in checking out any of those videos and you're looking for some food recommendations. But I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you did, please let me know by giving me a thumbs up. And if you're new here and you're not already subscribed and you'd like to see even more cat content from our channel, I would absolutely love it if you'd go ahead and subscribe to our channel. But thank you so much for watching, and I hope you tune in for our next video.